In the realm of online dating, experiences can vary widely, from genuinely enjoyable moments to situations so strange they leave a lasting impression. These stories reveal just how unpredictable meeting someone through dating apps can be, highlighting the sometimes bizarre side of the search for connection. Some time ago, while settling into a new city where I barely knew anyone, I decided to explore the local dating scene via Tinder. That's how I connected with a girl who seemed like the quintessential artsy hippie type. After exchanging messages through the app, we agreed to meet up for a drink. I wanted to pick her up at her house, where she greeted me warmly with a hug and mentioned a local bar she liked, perfect for just chatting and getting to know each other. I told her I'd drive us there. When I walked to my car and opened the driver's door, she unexpectedly stood behind me, silently staring for about 15 seconds. When I asked if she was getting in, she said yes and walked around to the passenger side. I suspected she might be a bit of a stoner, which was somewhat confirmed when she spoke in a whispered, low voice throughout the ride. I had to ask her to repeat herself several times just to catch what she was saying. At the bar, I made sure to sit in a quieter corner away from crowds so I could hear her better. We actually had a decent conversation, discussing our interests, and she openly admitted to occasionally smoking weed and other substances like mushrooms. Not being a fan of that lifestyle, I comforted myself by thinking maybe she was just a bit high, explaining some of her unusual behavior. By then, I'd also had a few drinks, which probably dulled my judgment. I invited her back to my place after the bar, and she agreed. Once there, after a few more drinks, she began talking about her jewelry. Suddenly, the situation took a strange turn. She declared that her jewelry was a secret that defined her and claimed, "I'm actually Anastasia. I was never killed in Russia. My jewelry is my link to my past." I found it hard to take that seriously, especially since I'd been drinking. I challenged her a bit with what little Russian history I knew, which made her explode. She yelled about my supposed disrespect to ancestors and then walked over quietly to grab me by the neck, bringing my face close to hers. She declared herself a shaman who would curse me, saying her ancestors had destroyed many people and that I came from oppressive lineage destined to be punished. Then, placing her hand in a whiskey glass, she made a cross on my face and kissed my forehead. At that moment, I started to sober up. I calmed her down by telling her I was just joking. Slowly, she started to regain her composure. Then she shifted topics, talking about a cat fetish she had and listing people she tames to act like cats. While I don't judge fetishes, her behavior was becoming more surreal as she started acting like a cat in my living room. Had she not yelled at me earlier, I might have found it oddly intriguing, but my instincts were screaming red flags. She noticed some sage on my counter and asked to light it to bless the house. I told her no. It was a personal ritual I preferred to do alone. This enraged her. She called me a horrible human being and screamed around my place. I told her I'd drive her home, and she sprinted outside, yelling that I was awful and should die. I told her to walk home if she wanted, locking my door behind me. Minutes later, she banged on my door, claiming she left her phone inside. I grabbed it from the counter and opened the door just enough to hand it to her. She attempted to push her way in, and I blocked her, warning she wasn't coming inside. She acted like she might strike me, screaming she wanted the whiskey bottle too, but I refused. After slamming and locking the door, I heard her footsteps retreating down the stairs. An hour later, feeling reluctant but curious, I checked outside. She was gone, and I never saw her again. Though it wasn't the scariest experience ever, I spent the next few nights nervously walking around my neighborhood, making sure she wasn't lurking nearby. Honestly, I hope she's doing okay somewhere, but I hope to never cross paths with her again. I was dating this guy for a while and really liked him. He told me he couldn't see himself marrying me, but still wanted to keep dating, so I decided to break up with him. After some time, even though I despise dating apps, I jumped back into Tinder and matched with a guy named Chad. He seemed good-looking, educated, and had a sense of humor. After chatting for a couple of weeks, We exchanged numbers and talked more. We talked about meeting several times, but our schedules never aligned. One day, Chad offered to Venmo me some money so I could treat myself to a couple bottles of wine, which sounded great, so I accepted. He also invited me to come over to his place after work, mentioning that other people would be there and there was no pressure if I felt uncomfortable. By then, I didn't feel weird about it, so I agreed and brought the wine. When I arrived, Chad was there with two friends, and everyone seemed perfectly nice and normal at first. But I noticed something odd right away. For kitchen cabinets in his relatively new, nice kitchen were completely smashed and ripped apart. When I asked about the damage, Chad said he had punched them in anger. I decided not to comment further. I grabbed an unopened beer and then a coffee. Everything seemed fine until one friend left, and suddenly, Chad flipped out like a lunatic. He threw a metal bar stool across the room, screamed wildly, and slammed his phone into the kitchen wall. The remaining friend stepped outside for a smoke. Out of nowhere, Chad came up and bit my leg. I hit him to make him stop, but he bit me again. I hit him harder this time, and he finally let go. When I asked where the bathroom was, Chad bizarrely hurled himself into the air in the hallway and landed flat on his back by the bathroom door. Then, mad that he injured himself, he punched a hole through the adjacent wall. In shock, I excused myself for the bathroom. When I came out, Chad approached me, crying and wailing about his sick father and how terrible his life was. I was terrified and just wanted to leave, but I also felt responsible to try to prevent him from hurting anyone. Soon, Chad's friend returned and suggested going fishing. Chad preferred to stay at home and get to know me better, but I insisted on the fishing plan so I could follow in my car and keep an eye on things. As we left the house, Chad demanded I ride with him, but I refused. He told me to go home, slammed my car door, and got in his car with his friend. They drove off. I sat in my car, trying to process everything, pulled up my GPS, and started driving for the neighborhood. Then I saw Chad standing in the middle of the road, facing me. He ran at my car, full speed, slammed both hands hard on my hood, and dragged him down like a horror movie scene. Then he ran to my side, tried opening my doors, and screamed for me to unlock. I refused, and when he punched my rear window, I put the car in reverse and sped away with him chasing on foot. I didn't slow down even when I saw his friend pulling into the neighborhood and honked to signal them. The next day, Chad's friend found me on Facebook and apologized, saying he had never seen Chad behave like that before. Chad also texted me to try to apologize, claiming he didn't remember anything. I told him he was lucky I didn't defend myself with violence and told him never to contact me again. I still have permanent bruises from those bites. In November of 2016, after a tough breakup, I finally felt ready to dip my toes back into dating, despite my usual disdain for apps like Tinder. Toward the end of October 2017, I matched with a guy named Dave. At first glance, he seemed decent enough, funny, polite, not pushing any inappropriate boundaries. We chatted for about 2 weeks before arranging a date in the city where he'd recently relocated, about 35 minutes from my place. I arrived early at the bar to wait for him. Dave was about 15 minutes late, but looked fairly close to his pictures, which was a relief. However, when he started talking, his voice struck me as very peculiar, almost like he was on the verge of tears, which was unsettling. I noticed tattoos on his arm, including the all-seeing eye of the Illuminati. Trying to lighten the mood, I joked. The Illuminati confirmed, "Tell me all your secrets." Rather abruptly, he snapped back, "What the hell are you talking about? Don't say that kind of stuff in public." His intensity made me uneasy. Then he said something strange. "You know that people who cry are people who die." I was caught off guard and unsure how to respond. About 20 minutes later, a couple of my friends showed up after I urged them come. To make space, I shifted to sit beside Dave so my friend could sit on the same side of the booth. The moment I sat down, he put his hand on my knee and squeezed. Not in a gentle, flirty way, but hard enough to surprise me. I gave him a look to stop. Then he leaned over and whispered, "You have lovely kneecaps." That was bizarre and frankly creepy. As the date wore on, Dave kept drinking, 7 beers in total, and it was only a Tuesday. When it was time to close my tab, he stood behind me, and I noticed he had a fully erect hard-on. I quickly signed my receipt and stepped away. As I prepared to leave, rain started pouring down, and he told me he had walked to the bar from his house and asked if I could give him a ride home. Hesitant, but not wanting to be rude, I agreed. On a short drive, he revealed he wasn't actually living there alone, that it was his sister's basement. When we pulled up to the house, he leaned over to kiss me. I tried to offer my cheek instead, but he physically turned my head and shoved his tongue into my mouth. I pulled away, but he tried again. Finally, I told him to get the hell out of my car. His response, "I'm in love with you. I knew from your pictures I had to introduce you to my sister and her husband." I warned him that if he didn't get out, I would call the police. He started tearing up and left. The whole experience left me feeling disturbed and cautious about dating apps all over again. After a tough breakup, I decided to re-enter the dating scene cautiously. I informed a few guys I had been chatting with on Tinder that I was taking a break to focus on finishing my degree, so they wouldn't think I ghosted them. One of these guys, who seemed nice enough, asked to stay in touch. We added each other on Facebook and started chatting casually about university, work, and everyday life. After a couple of months, he suggested grabbing coffee. I agreed, but made it clear it was just as friends, and he seemed fine with that. We planned to meet after my exams, about 3 weeks later. However, after making the plans, his messages became increasingly frequent, more than once a day, and he began calling it a date, although I repeatedly reminded him we were just friends. Then things took a dark turn. He suddenly snapped and started sending nasty messages on Facebook, so I blocked him there. But he still had my phone number, and he bombarded me with calls and voicemails late into the night, sometimes dozens between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., along with threatening texts. Back then, it wasn't easy to block someone on the phone, so I tried to ignore him, hoping he'd lose interest. When that didn't work, I contacted my phone company to block his number. They said they could only block 3 people and eventually told me they couldn't do it at all. Left with no choice, I called the police. They recommended filing a harassment report while coordinating with a phone company. Despite this, his harassment continued. He began threatening me, saying he would force me to go on a date with him, that I had no choice. He even started detailing my weekly schedule based on ordinary conversations, threatening to come to wherever I was. I had to stop my usual activities and practically become a hermit. It escalated to the point where he made a direct threat on my life, telling me, "Girls like you get what they deserve," or words to that effect, implying he would be the one to make that happen. I went back to the police, who secured a restraining order against him. After that, I never heard from him again. What shocked me most was that this guy was a full-grown 34-year-old man, while I was only 20 at the time. Definitely not just some dumb young kid's behavior. Since then, I've encountered many other difficult people, but I am grateful for the safeguards we now have that allow blocking anyone anytime. After spending about 2 months in the US, feeling a bit restless and bored from staying in my apartment binge-watching 90 Day Fiancé, I decided to revive my old dating profiles. Honestly, I wasn't quite sure what I was looking for. I just wanted some company and to see where things might naturally lead. That's when I matched with a guy who shared some common interests with me. We chatted a bit on the app, and after a couple of weeks, I felt comfortable enough to give him my number. Eventually, we agreed to meet at a pub for a few drinks. When I first saw him, I barely recognized him. It was clear that he had used older and edited photos for his profile. Not that he was unattractive, but he definitely looked different than his pictures implied. I'm not trying to sound superficial, but I think we all kind of expect this discrepancy in today's social media culture. And honestly, it's okay. We had a good time getting to know each other, talking about life, work, and how things back home were so different from life in States. At one point, holding hands felt natural enough that I let him kiss me. As we were leaving, he asked if I wanted to come back to his place for a cup of coffee. I knew what that really meant and said I wasn't comfortable going that far on a first date. He reassured me it would just be 1 cup of coffee and offered to give me a ride home afterward, so I accepted. His apartment was just a few blocks away, and as we headed upstairs, a few remarks made me uneasy. He told me I wasn't like most girls because I accepted his invitation and hinted at the possibility that I could be a psychopath. Then, glancing at my dress, he inquired about my breast size. I politely told him again that I wasn't planning on anything more tonight. Once inside his studio apartment, he excused himself to the bathroom, leaving me sitting on his bed. He didn't even have a couch. That's when my eyes landed on some unsettling items piled in the corner. A cartoonish goat mask and another mask resembling a cat or a tiger. Near these were a Bowie knife and a small woodcutter's axe. On the dresser, a black jumper lay draped, and on his bedside table, there was a pair of latex gloves. My gut immediately told me something was off. Alone, these items might not have been that alarming, but altogether in such a close space was enough to send warning bells. I didn't want to take any chances heading into what could be a dangerous situation, so I quietly stood up and made my exit, calmly leaving the apartment. I hurried down the stairs and walked a few blocks before catching a ride. Maybe I hurt his feelings by leaving, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. And if he had no ill intentions, I hope he understands. It was just something I couldn't ignore. Since then, I noticed he either blocked me on Tinder or deleted his account altogether. These stories vividly illustrate the unpredictable roller coaster that is modern dating, filled with moments of curiosity, excitement, and sometimes unsettling surprises. They serve as a powerful reminder to trust our instincts, stay aware of red flags, and prioritize personal safety when navigating encounters on dating apps. Whether it's eccentric behavior, emotional volatility, or outright threatening situations, vigilance is crucial in ensuring that our quest for connection doesn't compromise our well-being. If you found these stories intriguing, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share with friends for more compelling content.